What was the last good book you read? What was the last novel you read that kept your mind turning and your heart racing? What was the last novel you read that made you feel heard and understood by its author? What was the last amazing movie you watched? Did this movie make you cry tears of joy or of grief? Did you watch as the characters overcame challenges you yourself have faced, or simply watch in awe as the actor or actress captured every emotion you've ever felt? Whether you remembered these stories for their emotional connection or feeling heard by their authors, you remembered them for a reason. I have one more question for you. I want everyone out there to close their eyes. I want you to picture the main character or hero of this story that we were just talking about. Perhaps they're out saving the day. Maybe they're talking with their love interest. You can open your eyes. Was your character LGBTQ or queer identifying? Chances are the answer to that question was no. And that would make a lot of sense, since queer characters, while starting to be more frequently seen and heard, still comprise a small fraction of some of our greatest heroes. But what may surprise many people is that queer characters could be found in our popular stories as early as 1935. Though it's important to note that when I say could be found, I refer to rare and often problematic cases. The Gunn Center for the Study of Science Fiction defines the genre as literature of the human species encountering change, philosophy, and ideas, an approach to understanding the universe, and in the words of Edward Said, literature of the other. As long as the genre has existed, any person who identified as a member of the LGBTQ community would fit within these descriptions, especially being considered an other by society. Since science fiction has always had LGBTQ+ characters among its stars, it started to serve as a bridge between readers and characters that had very little in common, to find acceptance and understanding. And as inclusive as that sounds for the 1930s, it raises the question of why you likely didn't hear about that until now. After all, science fiction is supposed to be on the forefront of modern exploration and advancement, not several years behind it. A lack of representation is an impairment to progress. These stories can be a lifeline for queer people, as it's likely they're seeing someone like themselves represented for the first time. But the importance of queer and coming out stories in our society often goes undervalued, as people who don't resonate with them rarely engage in them willingly. After all, if you're not LGBTQ+, why would you pick up a book or watch a movie about a queer person? If it doesn't apply to people, they often don't want anything to do with it. But this is a dangerous mindset to be in, as it allows for complacency. This unawareness and disinterest can lead to the pandering of the queer community and the harmful act known as queerbaiting. Queerbaiting can be seen in some of our greatest sci-fi and fantasy stories. Stories such as Harry Potter, and the announcement in 2007, and more recently, from its author that said Albus Dumbledore had always been considered gay. Or the claims before every new Star Wars film that a queer character will play a major role in the film. While many popular series have taken steps to be inclusive in their casting and creation of characters, the promise of doing so and then falling short is more destructive than you can imagine. But when we talk about this, it's important that we understand gender identity and sexuality. Did Dumbledore, or any of the other revealed LGBTQ characters, ever expressly say that they were queer? Did they explain it to you, or take you through the thought process and the countless times you encountered them in the book or movie? If the answer is no, then you cannot say that person is queer. Plain and simple. Of course, then the inevitable question gets asked, what more do you want? Do you want them to scream, "I'm gay"? Yes. Yes, I do. Because without that, there is no justification to claim that that person identifies as anything other than straight or cisgendered. And why is this? Because straight is the default in our society. Straight characters have no need to go through the process of coming out and bearing their identity for the world to see. Because the world doesn't punish you for being straight. What is the importance of having LGBTQ plus characters in our books, movies, and shows? The answer lies with those that still have negative views towards queer people. To them, LGBTQ plus is merely a political issue, not something that impacts their daily lives, something they rarely have to confront face to face. But I think we can all agree that it is hard to have blind rage for someone when they are standing right in front of you. Hard to have blind rage when it is someone you love. These stories tell those people that our experiences of pain and love, grief and joy, rejection and acceptance are real, even though they are sometimes written into fiction. In today's literature, movie, and television shows, we are confronted with both good and bad endings for queer characters, and both sides end up getting called unrealistic. One of my favorite authors, Adam Silvera, wrote this about authors who write endings for queer characters that may not be the happiest. He calls on us not to attack these authors and claim that their doom and gloom analysis is inaccurate. Instead, we should honor the pain and the grief and the journey into the light that these stories so often represent. Just as gender identity and sexuality are on a spectrum, so too are the countless stories and experiences queer people tell. GLAAD, which is an advocacy group that works to share the stories of the queer community, releases a study every year entitled Where We Are in TV, highlighting the changes in representation across all forms of televised, scripted, and streaming services. That's right, they even bring Netflix under the critical eye. And while the content of the report's 37 pages deserves to be talked about at length, I want to use some of their findings to show how far we've come, but how far we still have to go. For the 2018-2019 season, 91% of characters in primetime television shows identified as straight, while only 9% identified as LGBTQ. Yet this year introduced many queer-focused and diverse shows, bringing percentages of representation up across the board. This is so essential to creating a world where anyone, even children, can turn on their favorite show and see queer characters represented. Children's sci-fi fantasy show Steven Universe, for the first time in the history of the genre, saw a same-gender wedding as a focal point of an episode, and they continue to introduce queer characters. However, there still exists a belief that the presence of queer characters is something children cannot handle, that they are simply too young for such exhibition in their lives. Yet there is no stigma around a young boy being called a ladies' man. No negative connotation given to a child's friend who's called their little boyfriend or little girlfriend. Why is this not too young for a straight identity to be ingrained in a young person's mind? We need to embrace our children when they come out, regardless of their age, and remind them through the stories we tell them that we will always love them. Change will come from young people and for young people. Through each great movement in history, each generation paves the way for the one behind it, traveling and expanding the path just a little bit more, leaving something better for the ones that come behind. I can say 100,000 times that myself and every other queer person is a human being worthy of respect and love. But it might not be me that gets it through to someone who hears any letter of LGBTQ and runs for the hills. A queer book character, or TV show protagonist, or movie hero can change hearts and minds in ways politics and speeches can't. These characters cry out through their stories because they just want to be loved. And in the end, isn't that what we all want? These characters in our books, movies, and TV shows will begin to break down the barriers that have gone up between so many people. It's up to me and you and everyone out there to stand up for queer stories. Because the future isn't just you and me. It's Sophia Bursett. It's Kyron, Griffin, Liara, Janelle Monáe, Ben, Achilles. It's Rufus and Mateo, and the countless others who are leading the way. These stories have existed both on and off the page for longer than anyone can recall. It's up to us to stand up, take them off the shelf, and recognize that these characters are your neighbors, your coworkers, your loved ones, maybe even you. Once we break the barrier between LGBTQ+ characters in fiction and reality, we can then begin to acknowledge every queer person, every queer story, on and off the page.